Welcome, everybody. We came a little bit early this month so that we could give everyone time for the holiday. And thanks for turning out. This is a great group of folks, and I think we're gonna enjoy tonight's talk. And first, we'll go through a couple of things here, and we hope everyone has a great, happy, safe holiday, and hope everyone's doing well still, and is continuing to enjoy the coming holiday. Let me see. Our mission since October 21st, 2014 is to create opportunities for anyone to learn and share knowledge about the field of user experience. Please invite your coworkers, let them know about this. We do record these too. Whenever they enable us to, we'll upload them to YouTube and let everyone learn more about the conversations that we have here at Do UX. Also, we have co-organizers here. Abhishek is traveling internationally right now, so he hasn't been able to join us for a little bit, but obviously you've seen Jason and Leah and Matt. I think he had his camera off for a little bit, but Nick is our newest contributor, and he's going to help us organize some events and especially focus on what we're going to do with Brew UX. So if you have any questions about that, reach out to any of us and we'll be happy to follow up. And of course, I'm Wes. If you want to take a screenshot of this, we'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn and follow up on anything that's interesting to you. And if you want to speak, reach out to any of us and we can maybe help you with topics or just follow up with you on anything that you're interested in. So thank you very much for that. And a little bit of housekeeping, please, if you don't mind, turn your camera on. We love to see you. It does make this a lot more intimate since we are virtual. It is awesome, though, that we have people from all over the place. So someone from Colombia is here. That's amazing. Thank you for coming. We've got New York City, obviously people from Orlando, but also, we've got Michigan, Port St. Lucie, West Palm. So thank you for tuning in wherever you might be. And we're glad that we're able to make this available to people that are outside the Central Florida community too. If you have any questions, I'm sure Christian will have gaps there for you to ask questions, but you can also throw them out in the chat and we'll try to circle back on those. And we do have opportunities at the end to have a kind of a discussion too. And on that, our conversation is UX tips and heuristics for better usability. Christian Laing is going to be sharing some of his experiences. He's a UX UI designer for London Computer Systems, but he's been active with Do UX for a while now, a couple of years at least, right, Christian?
Yeah, I was going to say that. I think this is actually my 2-year anniversary. I think it was nice. November. So yeah, good timing.
Yeah, so it's been really cool to see Christian in person and see him growing in his UX career. And I know that he loves to share what his journey has been like. And as I said, he's with London Computer Systems. Prior to that, he was at, I think it's PlateRate. He was a UX designer there. And also, Christian has been an international traveler. He has taught language in Korea and Seoul, Korea. And he also has traveled to Madrid, Spain. I think he's worked there in some context. He's done a lot of different things. And also, you're a master chess champion?
Oh no, definitely not. I wish.
No? Okay.
I played competitively for a while, not much anymore, but I did play competitively for quite a bit of time there.
Cool. So if you're interested in chess, that's something that might be a cool connection that you could have with Christian. And on that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Christian, and let you kind of talk. If you want to give us a little bit more background about yourself, that would be awesome. And then we can dive into the discussion.
Yeah, sure. Excellent. Should I go ahead and share my screen, I guess?
Sure.
Or do you want me to? Yeah, let me.
Just made you a co-host just in case you're having trouble sharing screen.
Okay. All right. Is everyone happy?
Sure.
Cool. All right. Yeah. So Wes, you pretty much laid it out there. for me. But yeah, my name is Christian Laing, UX UI designer at London Computer Systems. We are based in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I know we have a couple of people in here that are either from Ohio or somewhat around the area. But I did originally, when I started my UX career, I was in Orlando at the time, and that's sort of my affiliation with this meetup group and where I kind of started and met everybody and whatnot. And as Wes pointed out earlier, it is my second year anniversary now, so I think that's pretty cool as well too. But before I got into UX design, I was an English teacher in South Korea for 3 years, and then I also taught in Madrid, Spain for a little bit. And I traveled to, I think I lived in South America for about 6 months too, but that wasn't English teaching related. That was just studying abroad through college and stuff like that. But anyway, as he mentioned, some of my hobbies are just chess, travel, and attempting to cook. Not very good at it. I try, probably what Gordon Ramsay would refer to as like a idiot sandwich, but you know, A for effort. And at London Computer Systems, we have about 5 different products that we use, and we have 2 designers. So we're pretty busy oftentimes, but I get a lot of experience working with different types of situations. And since it is a property management software, there are a lot of accounting related features and whatnot. So it gets to be pretty complex and really deep. And I will have a few examples from work today, which, you know, I made sure I had permission from making sure I wasn't breaking any agreements or anything like that. So I will share a few of those as well as we go along here. But yeah, anyway, if you are curious about a little bit more about my journey, or you're just getting into UX and you want to know some of my perspective on what I went through and everything, feel free to hit me up after this, and I'll leave my LinkedIn link later too. All right, let's get started. All right, and I was inspired by the last meetup. I really liked that they had a giveaway, so I'm going to do the same thing. I have this book, 100 Things Every Designer Needs to Know About People. I found it a very practical book and a fun book to kind of just skim through. It was just really easy to read, so, and highly practical. So, and I will include a new UX sticker as well. All right. So today's topic, we're going to be talking about heuristics. And just to kind of define what a heuristic is, it's just a general broad rule of thumb, or kind of a design guideline that applies across a wide range of user interfaces. And there are always exceptions to heuristics, but generally they can be a great way to improve the floor of your design and give you just kind of that baseline to make sure you're really not messing up your designs. And with that, I do want to also add, you know, we do a lot of process-oriented UX conversations, and I understand that talking to a lot of designers that there's not always a very clear process, because it depends on the company you work for. It's different for everyone. And so I think heuristics are something that are extremely valuable that can help you in pretty much any circumstance that you find yourself in, whether you have research or not. Obviously, it's way better with
What are you doing right now?
Oh, wait, what now? Am I muted? Am I muted, or can you hear me?
No, we can hear you, Christian. I think someone else might not have had their microphone.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. No worries. But heuristics can be utilized in a wide range of scenarios. So that's why I chose this topic. And there were a lot of these that I use on a daily basis that have made a really big impact on our designs. So who's this for? It'll be predominantly for entry-level UX designers and PMs and developers. And again, as I just mentioned, you know, the process-oriented stuff, a lot of boot camps really center around the process, and you know, you do your research, your designs, your iterations and whatnot, but I don't think they talk about as many practical things from the people I've spoken to. Of course, each one is different, but that's the general vibe I've gotten. So I thought it'd be nice to throw some of these in there. And they're great ways to, you know, problem solve and find really good solutions. But also this could be valuable for PMs. I know that, you know, part of your job in general is UX. It overlaps a little bit, so you could find some value there. Also developers, you know, maybe you work at an organization where you don't have a lot of UX designers, or you don't have any at all, so you're left to do some of the design work. It could work really well for you as well. And then seasoned designers, a lot of this would probably be review. but I really would love to hear from you afterwards if something, refresh something, or maybe you add it to something, or it gave you some sort of value. That would be fantastic to hear. All right, and a couple different ways to utilize heuristics. You can use them. I mark 3. There are definitely more, but these are the predominant areas I use them. And it's when you're iterating. So anything like sketches, redesigns, or prototypes, I can just take a step back and remember some of these. And it's just sort of a mental checklist that I use to make sure that I'm utilizing all my resources available to solve a problem. The second one has actually been the most effective way for me in my situation, and that's UX evangelism within teams and organizations. So this may be a little bit more common where you are at a company that's just starting out to have UX. It's pretty new, and you're really trying to get executive buy-in, basically. And so we actually had a funny story where I explained one of these heuristics to one of our stakeholders, and then he explained it to one of our PMs, and then one of our PMs kind of, taught me what the heuristic was, which was kind of funny. So it went full circle within the organization. So they do travel, and it's a good way to put kind of a concept into one term and to explain it that way. And then heuristic evaluations, of course, it's sort of like a checklist. Like I said, I do it mentally, but I know a lot of companies will list them out. Jacob Nielsen from the Nielsen and Norman Group, who will talk about, he's got his own list, and I've included actually one of them today. So without further ado, we'll get started. And again, I do want to preface this by, we're going to look at a couple designs that I've worked on within my company, but also we're going to look at some big tech companies, medium-sized companies, and smaller companies. And none of it's really criticizing. It's just kind of pointing out a better way, or maybe a different way to utilize something, because I think we all know as designers, there are a ton of constraints. It can be time constraints, resource constraints, development constraints. So I think it's really unfair just to kind of jump into design and criticize it. So I don't want it to be viewed that way, because there are a wide variety of circumstances that we have to design under. All right, so we're going to look at 4 today, and after each one, we'll go through a couple of real-world examples, then a couple design examples, and then we'll kind of have a discussion after each one, and I'll open up the floor for everyone else to chime in. So, all right, the first one is Jacob's Law, and I feel like it's one of the most fundamental laws in UX. And it basically states that users spend most of their time on other sites, so users prefer your site to work the same way as all other sites they already know. So basically, this is really hitting on conventions. And if you don't know who Jacob is, that's the design group I just mentioned, the Nielsen and Norman Group. They're like a heavy research-based UX organization. And Jacob Nielsen is one of the founding fathers of that, with Don Norman, who also has a ton of books out there and a lot of great resources. But they've been in the game for decades now. I mean, I think all the way back to the 80s, if I'm not mistaken. So anyway, this is his law, one of the things that he really hits on, and I have found it quite useful. So looking at a few conventions in the real world, the first thing I really think about are stop signs. And that's because no matter where I've really been in the world, whether it was Korea, Spain, South America, Africa, whatever, stop signs always appeared the same. You have like a 8-point octagon, and the text might be different, but it's red. So you can always kind of catch that. The other thing I thought about were just car pedals. Maybe you change the side of the road you're driving on, or the side that the driver is on might change a little bit. But car pedal, gas is always on the right, brake is always on the left. You might have the clutch if you're driving manual or something. And those are the things that are easy in a car. And then I think about, every time I've rented a car, the things that were a little bit more difficult, like, the dashboard, for example, that always looks slightly different. It always takes me a little bit of time to adjust to that. So I think cars are a good example. And then also placement of kitchen utensils. It's, how many times have you gone into an Airbnb where you can just kind of guess where the, certain pots and certain pans might be based on where they're located in the kitchen. They're close to where they're going to be used. Maybe it's like underneath the oven, you keep your trays or your pans down there or something like that. But generally, I found that to be pretty consistent across many of the places I've been as well too. So those are some conventions in the real world. So the first thing I'd consider when you're looking at Jacob's Law, that's just look at the conventions within your industry. So I put up a few different examples here. The first example was from the e-commerce industry. So I pulled Etsy, Amazon Prime, and Target here. And you can kind of notice a few things that are pretty similar amongst all of them. And this is actually pretty similar among most websites in general, at least landing pages and whatnot. But you have your logo on the left side, and you can pretty much guarantee that when you click that, you're going to go back to the home page. Also in the center, especially in an e-commerce application or website, you're going to have kind of an Omni Search or global search that will allow you to find anything that you're going to potentially need or that you can't find by browsing. And then on the right side, you'll notice that there is a cart for checkout. And then you can even notice below too, there's kind of a secondary navigation for things that they've categorized that they think users will click on. They're in slightly different places, but generally they're right under that main point of navigation. So that's the e-commerce industry. Just to mix it up a little bit and to focus on something a little bit more design oriented, I took Figma and Adobe XD, and Sketch is even very similar as well too, the big three. I just didn't have a Sketch membership to use that as an example, but nevertheless, it's about the same. And you can kind of notice how all the alignment features are at the top. You have the fixed position when scrolling, that feature is available. Your text is somewhere kind of right below the middle. And then you have, where you're going to align your text within the box and all sorts of other features. And there are some slight differences, of course, but for, general purposes here, they're all pretty similar, and you can jump from one or the other and you'll get the vibe pretty quickly. And even the controls are pretty similar as well too. So we just talked about placement a little bit, and I think another really great example of how to look at Jacob's Law is not only where things are located on a certain page or where users expect them to be, but also the functionality of certain things like icons, or when you click on a drop down or something like that. Are those going to interact with users with how they're expected to, or how users expect them to? And I'll give you a couple examples. So the first example on the top right here, this is from Microsoft's Exchange, just the web version. And I do this every single day, or a couple times a week at least, where I'll open it and I'll try to accept a meeting. And you can see that the title here of the dropdown is sort of in this blue text. And that typically is, indicates like it's a hyperlink and that it's something that's clickable, that's an action. And it's not a huge deal. It's pretty trivial, but when you have a lot of those little things, they kind of start to add up. So it's something to think about, making sure things are where they're supposed to be, and making sure that functionality that exists does the things that it's expected to. And below that, on the second example on the right, is actually an example from my work, and it's something that's kind of become a joke within our, even our stakeholders are joking about it now, and something we're going to change here pretty shortly. But they've utilized the copy icon as kind of separating it as a separate window. And I do know that Instagram and Facebook kind of use a similar icon to indicate that there are multiple files within an attachment. But here, I think it'd be much better to use the expand button, which is much more conventional and used for this kind of situation. So that's kind of funny. Next thing, and this is a little bit tough for designers, and I think it's one of the hardest parts, and it's basically just trying not to, reinvent the wheel. And I know that that's tough because as designers, we have a little bit of that creative side in us. And the only thing that I'll add to that is, if you're going to try to break Jacob's Law or break a convention, I think it's okay. You just have to make sure that clarity trumps the consistency. So make sure you do your usability testing to back that up, but just make sure clarity trumps consistency. And when I think about breaking conventions, I think of one of the things that just came out recently, which was the Model S steering wheel, literally a wheel. And they're kind of using this, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, so if I butcher the pronunciation, feel free to let me know. But I think it's called, I know it's YOK, so maybe it's yoke or yoke, I'm not 100% sure. But anyway, I'm really curious to see how this pans out. Elon Musk has stated that he's not going to change it. There's been some, I don't want to say controversy, but people have had their opinions about it. And I'm really curious to see, I typically drive with one hand on top of the steering wheel. So I'm kind of curious to see, when you're turning, how you let it slide through. Obviously, you can't let it slide. But then there are some pros to it as well. They've talked about it clearing up space to view the dashboard of the speedometer or whatever it's called. But anyway, so pros and cons, but generally speaking, just don't try to get too crazy and break a convention unless you kind of tested it and it's going to work, or you're Elon Musk. So ask yourself if you're him. And if the answer is no, I'd probably stay with conventions. All right. And the last bit is conventions constantly change. So, when you're looking within your industry, if you look at one example, like let's say Etsy or someone, and they do something a particular way, typically make sure that you're looking at a wide variety of companies within your industry to make sure that it's not just one, that all of them are doing it. Because these conventions do change for the better, and usually for the better. That's why they become conventions. But anyway, a tip to stay on top of conventions is to keep a repository of designs saved on your computer. And this is something I admittedly don't do as much anymore. I did it a lot more when I was first starting out in design, and it really helps kind of build a network of ideas kind of subconsciously. But I'll give you a few examples here. These are some examples that I've kind of noticed recently. And when I say recently, I mean within the past few years. But you see a lot more slide up features and slide up functionality. And I think that has a lot to do with ergonomics and also saving space. But you have 3 social media apps here. You have, I think it's on the left, I want to say that's LinkedIn, then we have Facebook and Twitter. But typically when you would click these kind of ellipsis or more action icons, you would have like a little drop down beneath it, right? And it'd be like a little bit smaller, list a few actions. But now I'm starting to notice more and more that these things are kind of coming from the bottom, and not just these, it's a wide variety of function. I've even seen drop downs starting to be utilized in that way. So not saying it is a convention or it isn't, but it's been pretty interesting to me to see that happen more and more. I noticed it with Etsy recently on one of their apps. In case you don't notice, I use Etsy quite a bit. But yeah, another one would be the new URL location. And this is the Tor browser, which is kind of it's a privacy browser. And they have their URL location at the bottom. And again, I'm noticing that that's probably because of ergonomics. I'm really starting to see a lot more mobile design trend towards ergonomics. And the recent iOS update, which I use Android, but one of my coworkers, one of my UX design coworkers, pointed it out to me and sent me a copy of his screenshot. And I know that you can edit these things, but it is kind of funny how the update automatically kicked in. And then I downloaded Mozilla Firefox the other day, and the same thing happened there. They give you the option when you're jumping in there, whether you want to use the URL at the top or whether you want to use it at the bottom. So that's kind of one trend I'm starting to notice, is that conventions are starting to be more mobile, ergonomically friendly on mobile designs and whatnot. But just to give you kind of close out Jacob's Law here, this is Naver, and Naver is Korea's, it's kind of like their Google. It's their, they have a maps app and a huge search engine, places, e-commerce, everything. And so obviously it's in Korean, so it's kind of hard to read, but just take a few seconds and I'd love to hear in the chat or anything, how many conventions that you can notice. What can you know, or what can you assume about this site that works as a normal site just based on where things are or common functionalities? So I'll give you a couple seconds to look at that, and I'd be curious to hear in the chat some of the things that you can point out. Let me know if it's too small too. It's kind of hard to gauge what it looks like on everyone else's computer, but I tried to make it as big as possible. Yep, hyperlinks underlined. Yep, search function, logo placement. Yeah, the grid views, exactly, right here. Yeah, account logins kind of a give me, right? Okay. Yeah, top right for language, yep. Yeah, so view count as well. Yeah, exactly. Add on the right. Yep. And there are some funny things. Since we're on the subject, it is kind of funny what is considered good design based on cultures. And that was a really important lesson to me, because I had a lot of talks with Koreans, and a lot of their websites seem to be very, very busy. Like, white space is not utilized as much as it is in common functionality today, like in the US or in Europe or in other sites. And they would constantly, I mean, they would tell me how much better this design is. So it's kind of funny. Yeah, same in China, exactly. A lot of the Eastern Asian countries, I know Japan is very similar as well too, but they prefer it, they're used to it. So it kind of shows you the power of conventions there, what people are used to. I'm curious to see over time if it changes though. Cultural difference, yep, exactly. So I do want to go ahead and open this up for discussion. You know, I pointed out a few conventions that I kind of think are heading towards mobile with the, you know, thumb-friendly design. But have you seen any recently that have kind of impacted the digital world or real life? And I'm curious if you've heard of Jacob's Law. I mean, if you pay attention to the Nielsen and Norman group, you've probably heard of it, but how do you utilize it in your practice? Feel free just to kind of open up. Wes, is it best just to let people talk, or do you think I should use the raise your hand feature here?
Oh, I think people can probably chime in. It's a small enough group, probably.
Sure. Okay.
Unmute.
I could tell you some in my space. So I'm in the travel space, right? So my company's Travel and Leisure, and our reservation systems for like brands like Club Wyndham in the timeshare space was like very particular to that industry, especially around, you know, booking weeks and stuff like that based on points. And one of the things I just did is do heuristics and look at, you know, how those Expedia work, how those, you know, Marriott work. And I saw all of those continued patterns. So I brought a more standard interface to our booking engines, and that has skyrocketed our bookings, you know, 35%. So yeah, that does help when people understand, oh, I have used that before everywhere else, so I know how to use it here now as well.
Yeah, that's a great example. Do you kind of utilize it with competitive benchmarking or something like that, or is it just something that you kind of consciously go do on the side?
So we don't do that. The way we do it is I look at I do like a benchmark of the existing data we have and look at how many bookings we're doing. And then I try to just sell it with mockups. I go like, hey, here's an example of Expedia, here's an example of Travelocity, here's Booking.com. You see this consistent pattern. And then I show like our design for our brand, right? And then I show this is how we can reuse all these components across all of the brands. And we want to try on this brand first, and we use Adobe Target, and then we test it. And when we tested it, like we started seeing these bookings going up, especially like this is a problem we have with rage clicks. We were clicking a lot with rage because they couldn't book because they didn't understand. And then like once we change it, like those rage clicks went up like 80% because it was a very consistent pattern. So that's usually what we do. It's really more on data analytics to figure out, oh, is that working or not?
Right. That's awesome. It's really cool to hear. Anyone else?
Yeah. Hey, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I just wanted to mention that in my company, I'm the design director, and we do products for mobile and web. And so I actually had a kind of a question, but I'd say our products mainly follow sort of more of a material design framework, and a lot of our UX patterns and stuff follow from material. But we also have to design for like, you know, OS X and like, you know, iPhones and stuff like that. And sometimes we come up against conflicting patterns with like the native operating system versus, you know, keeping a consistent UX for our product. And I was wondering if you've ever dealt with that, and how do you sort of weigh the consequences of either decision?
Yeah, I to be honest haven't come across that. We only have one mobile, or we have two mobile products, but they're pretty standard across both of them. There's not a lot of difference between the iOS and the material design. So to be honest, I haven't. I mean, I'd probably just go back to usability testing, and I guess a lot of that depends on resources as well too. So unfortunately, I can't comment too much on that from my situation.
Gotcha.
Sorry
yeah, I think no problem.
But if you have, I would love to hear more about that though, if you want to double down on it or comment.
Sure. I think when it comes to things like notifications and like you were showing like slide up menus and things like that, which might be more OS specific, I think we lean to like, if users are used to that, if they're Android users are used to it looking a certain way or behaving a certain way, then we should lean into that. But when it comes to like more, I guess I'd say like product branded, like onboarding messages or things that are more belong to like the branding of the product. I think those we try to keep consistent across, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah. And actually, now that you bring it up, there are a couple controls through iOS that I'll actually bring up later in one of the heuristics that we do override from iOS that I don't think is probably the best solution. And I don't want to like ruin it because we're not there yet or whatever. But there are a couple controls, and yeah, you do definitely have to weigh those options. But there have been a couple I know that we've kept, and then there have been a couple that we have changed. So we have dealt with that a little bit now that you mention it. Yep.
You know what's something that I really love that you mentioned is this ergonomics word, like I think what's happening is that people use their phones when they're driving. And for a long time, we have kind of ignored that fact. And these interfaces are getting better at being handled with one hand while you're driving. And it's just people want to do this behavior. So at least it's designed more ergonomic, so we can reduce accidents. I think that's right.
Yeah, well, that's pretty important. You're right.
I know they shouldn't be driving, but they do it.
Hey, you do see. Yeah, go ahead.
I would argue more ergonomics so that people can continue to shop on Etsy and Target and Wayfair and all those without getting exhausted. Amazon too.
What is that?
Maybe. But I actually wanted to touch on what you were saying with the slide up menu, because I'm actually working on something right now. It's more around like filtering and sorting functionality. And I've noticed across all those apps, all the examples that you showed, they've now converted to what is a bottom sheet coming from the bottom. And it's interesting because they're all following the same pattern now, but when you really dive into it, what the contents of what they have in each of those elements is actually drastically different. And it's really interesting to see how each of these companies is utilizing that pattern, but like slightly differently. And it's cool to look and say like, this looks nice. They followed the pattern, but I feel like this company executed the little micro interactions. And again, like whatever contents they put in it, it feels a lot better on another app. So it's like you've got the same pattern, but it's just designed differently. So
yeah, so making sure it works for your product.
Yep.
Excellent. All right, cool. We'll jump to the next one. All right, let me close this, make this window a little smaller so I can see my own screen. All right, cool. This is one of my favorite. This was brought up to me by a designer named Eric Kennedy. And I'll list a few resources here at the end of it so you can dive deeper into some of these heuristics. None of them are something that I invented, of course. But yeah, the 3 laws of locality. I find this one to be extremely practical. And it also depends on your industry, how much you would utilize it. But I'm in an industry where our software is highly customizable, and there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of different features within our software. So constant, there's a lot of things to go through, and this really helps me to simplify and make designs more intuitive. And everywhere I've used it within our iterations and then we've tested on them on the back end, they've always improved. And basically, the first law just states that users expect controls to be where they affect change. And the first example I wanted to look at, first law again. So again, this is an example from South Korea. This is in Seoul. And what they've started to do here is they've started to implement these kind of LED lights at the bottom. Can anyone guess why? I mean, it's probably pretty obvious once you think about it, but yeah, people looking down, exactly. People are constantly on their phones, and I'm not 100% sure if it's actually reduced, any casualties or anything yet. It's pretty newly introduced, so time will tell, of course. But the concept is, if you're looking down, to put the change where you're kind of looking or where you expect it to be. And so they've kind of changed the way they've designed this crosswalk light, and they still have the normal one as well. But it also has presented some other problems for drivers. Like it's kind of contradictory for someone that wants to take a right turn and it's green. It might be someone could have some trouble there. So anyway, I thought that was a cool design in the real world. And the first law, put actions where they affect change. This first example might not be so insightful, but I'm going to show a couple more as we go that will be a little bit more insightful, hopefully. But as you can see here on Spotify, and one of my favorite playlists here that I run to frequently, it's if you click on one of those songs, then a couple actions will pop up. You can save it, you can click into the more options, and you can look at those and interact with whatever you need to. But the point is that the interactions are there where you expect it to change. Now, this example, I think, is a little bit better and more instructional because it's not a common industry. So this is chess.com. And besides playing on a chessboard, which is the primary functionality that you're utilizing when you're on this website, the second most, I guess, vital piece of this is the clock. Chess players are constantly looking at clocks. So especially when you get into like blitz games, and blitz games are just rapid, really low time. When you get down to 15 seconds, 10 seconds left, one of the features that you have on online chess is that you can add time to your opponent's clock. And you can do this for a variety of reasons. I never do it. I'm pretty ruthless when it comes to it. I'll take a win any way I can get it. But the feature is there to add on 15 seconds to your opponent's clock. And here on chess.com, if I were in the last 15 seconds of a game, and the first time I actually played on it, I didn't know that this feature even existed here. I failed to add on time to my opponent's clock. It was a friend I was playing with, and I was going to be a little bit generous there, but I wasn't able to find it. Can anyone, immediately locate it or find where the add time button is?
Underneath the white knight and the.
Nope, that's just showing that it's your turn to assemble.
Is it on the bottom right, where you have the forward, back, play controls? That one on the left, right there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they put it all the way down here. It's not extremely intuitive to know where you're gonna add time to your opponent's clock. But if we take a look at their main competitor, leechess.com, I think their user interface is a lot cleaner. It's a lot more intuitive, a lot easier to use. But I mean, you could pretty much, I would assume that you'd probably be able to figure out here pretty quickly how to add on, 15 seconds of extra time. You can see that blue little plus on the right side there. And it's just much more intuitive, but hey, they put the control where it affects change. Since you're changing the opponent's clock, that's where they put the control. And just as a bonus heuristic, I think it's the second law of Jacob Nielsen's 10 heuristics, but there should be a match between systems and the real world. And basically what they say is that, the jargon that you use, the verbiage, the way things look and appear should imitate the real world as much as possible. So if you look here, you'll notice on the right side, the clock is located on the right side. But if you go back to chess.com, the clocks are located on the top of the opponent's board and the bottom for you. And this makes it a little bit difficult when you get down to 10, 15 seconds a person, that you're constantly, because sometimes you're playing off of your opponent's clock. So you want to see that. It's a little bit more work to look up and down, where Lee Chess has kind of mimicked the real world, and they've put the clock off to the right, and they've made it a little bit bigger since it's more of a function that's more utilized. So I thought that was a cool little heuristic as well too. But in short, chess.com kept it far away. Lee Chess has that control right next to it where it affects change. Okay. The second one is if a control affects change across an entire area, place it above that area. Won't spend too much time here. And just to give you another pretty obvious example, uninsightful, anything that affects this whole list altogether is placed right above it. If you think of Gmail is very similar, how you can check one box for an email to delete it. But if you want to check all of them, there's that universal checkbox at the top that will go ahead and check everything for you. So yeah, if you want to select everything or change everything, put that control above where it's going, the area that it's going to change. And this is an example, and apologize about the pixelation. This is an example from work. We're moving over a software to our web version to have a cleaner interface. And I'm not going to go too deep into it, but in short, there are 3 little boxes up here at the top. And right here on the previous page, you set a certain filter to add on a list of items that you want to increase a customer's new rent for, a property's new rent for. And in the middle, you have this huge area where you can interact by choosing how you want to increase your property's rent. A couple different ways to do that. But when I first looked at it and through some of the testing we've done, it's not inherently obvious what you're really, even though you're modifying rent, where is this going to affect change down here? It's just not as intuitive as it potentially could be. So one solution that we mocked up, and we're in the middle of iterating. This is an iteration that we've kind of just guerrilla tested. We haven't put it through any formalized testing or anything yet, but our results already have been, people are picking up on it much quicker. And basically we put all of the controls where they affect change. So as you can see, when you go into a hover state for the new rent, you can have the option to edit the new rent. And once you edit it, you'll also have a little label to the side indicating how much you've increased, whether that's by percent or whether that's by dollar amount. And we put a kind of a universal control at the top. So we wanted to make sure that users, when they land on here, there are not really many things to interact with. So it is pretty, we use the affordance of the dark gray circle there to help indicate that something is clickable and there's something to do here. So that has increased our, the time on task was greatly reduced through this update, and that we use the law of locality here. And there are a few exceptions to this rule, and I think of Canvas apps. And so that would fall under anything like XD, Sketch, Figma. And that's where the main thing you're interacting with is in the center. So a lot of your controls are either on the top or on the sides as well too. And there are quite frankly like too many controls and to really put it where it's affecting change. But there are some ways around it. Some companies have innovated. And I think of Medium when I look at this. They put the controls whenever you highlight something, that they have a little pop-up right there on what you want to edit. Now, obviously, they have different features. The top one, Google Docs, they obviously have a lot more features than Medium does. So Medium's reduced it, but by doing that, they reduce the clutter and they utilize the law of locality here. But there are some exceptions to the rule, as with any rule. And the third law is the farther control is where it affects, from where it affects change, the more it should pop. And so I have 3 messaging apps here. The first one is WhatsApp. The second one is Signal. And then the third is Kakao. Kakao is Korea's messaging service. So you can see what WhatsApp does here is right where you're changing your status, they put the action buttons right next to it. And of course, it is a little bit different to be fair because I have the controls up, but when you drop it, it still stays near to where it affects change. And they're using sort of a tertiary button here, which is completely fine because you're putting these 2 actions where they affect change. When you go to Signal, it's a little bit farther away. Even when the keyboard's up, it's farther down. So they've made the button pop a little bit more. Then when you go to Kakao, you edit it. There's not much functionality here. And so Avery, this kind of goes what you were talking about earlier. They've kind of utilized one of iOS's standards and they've put the controls on the top bar up here. And so I click OK, and every time I go to this screen over here, it never ceases to amaze me. I'm never thinking. I just click the back button to go out, and it always asks me if I want to save my changes. So I never even really look up here at the top right where it says done to kind of confirm my changes because I don't even know it's there. And just to give you a little bit broader of an example here, this is Polar. And again, sorry for the pixelation, but it's a little bit of an older app. This was an app that was acquired by Google, I believe, some time ago. But anyway, what they've done is they've kind of followed the natural order of things, which is your username, full name, email, password. Normally, you'd have the call to action button somewhere down here. They utilized the iOS standards and put it up here. But by doing that, they also made the button pop a little bit more. So the farther away from where that button should affect change, the more you should make it pop. I thought that was a good example. So just to wrap this up a little bit, if I were to do that to Kakao, the Kakao app, something I would consider or a recommendation I would make would be to just make it pop a little bit more. So you can do that by making it a primary button. And you're probably wondering why it's yellow, and that's Kakao's colors. So I just utilized one of their colors for that. But they progressively pop a little bit more, but they are a couple different solutions that you could utilize. And this is something called the Squint Test. It's something with UI that I utilize quite a bit. And so it just imitates, if you squint your eyes, what a screen would look like. And whenever you're trying to utilize a call to action button, it's just a good tool to kind of get a glance at your UI and making sure make sure that your the attention is where it should be on the screen, or yeah, basically that. So all I've done really here is just applied a layer blur. But you can also squint your eyes and try it that way too. But I've tried this with a lot of designs, and it's really helped with a sort of a visual hierarchy of the page. But I would love to know if you use this heuristic to solve any of your design problems. Is it something that you constantly think about, or just subconsciously probably think about? And do you think there are industries, kind of like we talked about the Canvas apps, where this is difficult to accomplish?
I can think of one really powerful tool that does this, particularly that proximity, and the combination of that with like that Canvas style, right? It would be Grammarly, because like it goes with me everywhere, and it's become contextual to everything I'm doing. It's always there with a FX change. That's a good example. In my work, biggest thing is wherever there is a reservation, like the controls to be able to edit it are always going with it. Doesn't matter if it's in your account or if it's in your dashboard. If there's a reservation object, it carries with it the ability, the controls to affect change to it, to modify it, to cancel it, whatever the case might be.
That's awesome. So the Grammarly was a little bit more, was it similar to the Medium example that I showed?
Yeah, and it goes with me everywhere, like especially on the web. Like if I go to Facebook and I'm going to write something, it's there with me, and it helps me affect my writing right there. And one of the new things they have is like it opens up a panel like right next to my writing, takes all my writing and starts giving me like all these tips right there. And one of the things doing now is giving you a little bit of styling, something making things bold, especially on Red is very useful, because Red is like, oh, weird, and how do you make something underlined, and it helps you with things like that. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, that is cool. It's a good example.
An example I've seen is through Squarespace. And I think their examples are a little bit more complicated, because you either have a choice when you select on an item, whether you want to just edit that item or whether you want to edit the style of that item, like for the entire website or the entire experience. And so I like it when you select something, it kind of gives you in that sidebar options of either, just doing it on that one instance or doing it globally.
Yeah, it's about contextualizing, right? Puts context to what you're doing, makes it that much more intuitive, I think. It's a good example too.
Christian, I like what you said too about needing to use a button that pops more when the action is further away from where you're at. It reminds me of how we try to only use one primary action button within a UI. We have a primary blue button that we try to only use one of those per screen, so that you know where to go for the primary action. But we have this like create new post button that's primary action color, but it's way up in the top right corner in like an icon width strip on the right side of the UI. And I think locality is a good excuse for keeping that around, because it's a primary driver within the product we're in. And even though it is the primary action color, it's separated from where your working space is. So it's a good reason to justify keeping that be a primary action as a primary action color.
Yeah, because you can't always keep the button, close for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of constraints. And I think that's a lot of the power of modern design trends, which are the monochromatic themes, is that when you do have that primary action button, it really calls that attention, versus having all that color. It looks like candy all over the screen when you, and it's from a visual perspective, you're competing for attention. So absolutely. And that's where I love the Squint Test. That's a great tool that we've utilized quite a bit, just to kind of step back and view the visuals of our products. But cool. All right. It's already about 8:30. I'm going to try to speed up a little bit, Wes. But the law of locality, I think, was the longest one. But the next one is obvious always wins. And this was brought up. There's a great article about this, and even a speech by Luke, and Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, because you know the pronunciation. Luke Rabluski, how do you pronounce his last name?
Rabluski.
Yeah, it always trips me up. But he's got a great article on it, and I'm going to show you a few examples. And these are just some kind of studies from a couple bigger companies. But basically, hiding critical information to simplify designs could negatively impact usage. Have a good understanding of what's important to your users and to show what's actionable. So here, the couple things we're going to go over. The first two I just mentioned. The last two are just really simple things like labeling your icons and the power of doing that, and showing you some examples, and good icon usability standards. And then also just good accessibility is also better for usability as well too, and just a few tips there. But the first example I wanted to look at, this is Facebook way back in the day. Obviously, this is not one of their current updates on the right, but this was an update after the first two screens. But what you can see is they have this this hamburger menu in the top left, and we've talked a lot about ergonomics, and people are much less likely to click things that are in the top left. They will judge the interaction cost before they utilize those things. But basically, what it's trying to say here is out of sight, out of mind. And so you can see here within the hamburger menu, they have the news feed, the messages, the nearby, the events, the friends, the saved. And they've taken what's important, what they want their customers to engage with, and they transitioned it to a bottom navigation bar, which is pretty standard these days. I mean, most apps that you open have this, but that wasn't always the case if you go back like 10 years ago or so. But after they did this, Facebook increased their engagement, their satisfaction, revenue, speed, and even the user's perception of speed metrics. So that was a very interesting update that they had, and I thought that was a good case study. And ZBox actually suffered the opposite, where they were showing at the top here, they have this little tab menu where it shows like My TV, Discover, Guide, Me, and they tried to simplify their design, and we hear this quite a bit, simple is better. But you just have to be really conscious that when you're designing and you're trying to simplify something, especially this is harder on mobile screens, that you're not taking away critical information that the users are trying to engage with. The funny thing about this is when I was reading the case study, actually the users preferred this design, the newer design, it was cleaner, but they just weren't engaging with it as much. So this kind of shows you, this goes back to focusing on business needs versus user needs and trying to find that overlap. So they ended up changing, doing some A/B testing after this and changing a few things where they hid just a couple things, and then ended up where they just had to show this this top navigation bar up here because their engagement time was cut by 50% when they decided to put this in a hamburger menu. And their daily frequency went down, as well as their the user's time on app. So show what's actionable, show what you can do. That's the hard part of design, is figuring those things out. That's where the research comes in, showing what's finding out what's important for your users and making that judgment call. It's always a work in progress, but just make sure that you're not hiding critical information. The next thing is labeling your icons. I was listening to the Nielsen and Norman group. It was a couple of weeks ago, and they had an episode, and they're basically asking a bunch of designers, what hill would you die on? And I couldn't think of many, but this is probably the one where I feel most passionate about. I think there are some exceptions, but I think it's just better to be safe than sorry with this. And icons, firstly, they're kind of used as a metaphor. And what I like to think about when I think about metaphors are the paperclip icon. We view that as like an attachment, or the paper plane icon, which is known for like to send a message or something. And it can really lead to kind of ambiguity from the user side if you don't have a loyal customer base. So there are a couple specific icons I wanted to take a look at, and I've marked a few examples here. The heart icon is the one I can think of most, where I see it within a ton of different apps, and it always has different context. So the first example, I have 23andMe. Second one is probably familiar to most people. This is Instagram. I know they obviously made some updates recently, but you have Instagram here, Etsy, and then you have, I think this is Webull below. And does anyone off the top of their head, I mean, if you don't know 23andMe, if you know it, I think it's kind of cheating, but if you don't, what would you think this heart means? Genetics, relative match. So it's your health. So with 23andMe, it's like your health genetics. So somewhat close to the genetics. But the point is you probably had to think about it, right? It wasn't inherently obvious what the heart icon meant there. So yeah, text labels just help eliminate any ambiguity or uncertainty. Obviously, you have to consider with something like Instagram, they have a very loyal customer base and most of their customers are on there daily. So perhaps they could get away with it. I don't know what's going on in their backrooms or their designs or anything, so don't want to comment on that, obviously. But it just seems like there's such a high return on an investment with labeling icons, and I've seen it over and over in our usability testing. And it's just something, yeah, that I will always kind of stand by and I will always try to do if possible. I mean, here, I guess a couple of the reasons could be space, but with, a bottom navigation bar, usually that's pretty feasible. So anyway, and the last part of labeling your icons, and that's just to keep them visible at all times without any interaction costs from the user. And so, a common example of this I see, and it's actually something that we've gone through with our testing and found that even when users do know what the icons stand for, if they're frequent users or loyal customers, then they may know, but they're still less likely to interact with the icons that they can't see. It's just a little bit less obvious. So you see this often with your collapse button down at the bottom. I've seen this trend, and I don't want to say trend, I guess convention of sorts. And hey, there are pros and cons to it, right? You can save space if screen size is something, or maybe the customer's in there every day, like I said, but it is something to think about and pay attention to when you're testing, because like I said, for us, even when it was closed with loyal customers, we found that engagement went down quite a bit. I did like Netflix quite a bit, and the reason behind this is their tertiary icons are labeled in mobile apps, and I find that quite rare these days, that the tertiary icons, and the information icon is one of the most common icons, commonly understood icons globally. Wherever I go in the world or whatever airport I'm in, the information one always means the same. But if you go through Netflix's app, they've labeled everything. They've gone above and beyond just to take that extra step to make sure. And I'll give you another example. On Spotify, I had no idea that I could create my own queue. You should know that, but I'm kind of a lazy user. I recently just found that the other day by exploring, but I've gone probably years without utilizing that feature, which I found quite interesting. But hey, I'm sure they've done their research. They've got a good team and they have their reasons, but it is something to just keep in mind. I would err on the side of caution and try to label your icons when possible. For accessibility, a lot of these are probably familiar to most of you, but just meet your WCAG color contrast guidelines. And obviously there are different contrast guidelines for different sizes of text. This is kind of your standard text, maybe like around 18 point font, non-bold. But you can see here, there are a couple colors that are really hard to make, that get that contrast that you really need. Orange is one, yellow is one, a lot of the very luminous colors, cyan, magenta, etc. So one strategy that you can utilize to try to make those a little bit more accessible while keeping the same color is color alteration. You can basically just make the text a little bit darker version of that color, and then you can make the background a little bit lighter version of that color. So you can see you're still utilizing orange. Maybe it's not the company orange. You have to kind of decide that, the gives and takes of your company. But this is a problem we've had to work through a little bit, because one of our colors is orange. It's kind of our secondary color. So we've started adapting around that a little bit. But yeah, I did want to get into some color theory, but that could be a whole topic on its own. So I think the HSV color system is a great one. I know a lot of people use RGB, but there's a really intuitive way to adjust your colors through that. But we'll save that for another time. Don't use color alone to indicate status. I saw this, I see this on Microsoft Exchange quite a bit, and I saw it even on Meetup.com today, where it's very common. Well, I wouldn't say so common, but I do see it enough where it calls my attention. And you'll see that they've only used color. They've used color alone just to indicate, on their navigation bar where they're located or what section they're on. And a good fix for that is you can either just add a solid line under it, and this helps people that obviously have visual impairments. And then you can even add an overlay if you want to add that little bit of extra pop, if it's something you want someone to notice and maybe your screen's really busy, but it's not too overwhelming or too strong, and you still have that accessibility there. And just to give you a couple examples, below you can see in this middle example, this is Venmo. So this is a recent update that they just made. It's really hard to tell, first of all, what those icons mean. That's one thing, but I went ahead and put it in a simulator and simulated the red-green colorblind. And this is what it appears to that person. So it's really hard to see right here what they're, if you want them to engage with certain things, you should, let them know where they're at. It's really difficult to see that, this first icon over here is where they're at. And I think to show you a good example of how I think it's done is LinkedIn. I really like their navigation where they've grayscaled everything. They've made it a lot darker. Obviously, the contrast is much higher. And they have this little tab that you see here that they use for websites frequently. They've started, I've seen that a little bit more recently too. But yeah, just don't use color alone to indicate status. And then last one is just label all input fields. And I don't see this, I see this in more industries, people that typically don't have like a UX team or designers to do things because it's just not, I guess, common knowledge. But it is just important to note that don't use placeholder text as your label, because as soon as you start typing things in, it can be very easy to forget the fields, previous fields, what they were if you put the right things in and error states. It just makes things a little bit more difficult. And then also with that, if you look at the error state here on the right side, if someone's colorblind for red, green, whatever, it can be extremely difficult to see that there's an error state. So I always add text plus a little symbol. Text is usually sufficient enough, but I also increase the border of our error fields as well from 1 to 2. So that's another one. But anyway, have you been able to increase engagement or improve any metrics by making actions more obvious? I think the last two, the icons and the accessibility, are just things to make it generally more obvious and usable for users. But have y'all gone through any design changes within your organization that, moving navigation items around, hiding them or showing them, and how has that affected engagement?
Definitely in my space. So when I came to Wyndham, one of the things I did is some research to understand what the demographics were. Come to find that our demographic was quite older. So one of the design principles that I put in place is that iconography is decoration, right? It's not UI. So like we have, these really pretty icons in our brand provided to us, and we decorate our navigation system with them, but it's not the driver, because for our demographics, they're not modern technology users. So they're, even though that might be a standard thing that's used throughout maybe apps, they'll still not understand what it means.
Right.
So that's one example.
Yeah, that's interesting. Anyone else? Has anyone else experienced something like Facebook or Zbox or anything? Yeah, search and navigation is a big one. That's where that's what we were studying as well too. Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and go to the last one. This is probably the shortest one, but the best interaction is no interaction. So really what this is kind of saying is, think about the sum of interaction whenever users are going through your site. And that's both physical and mental. And the real world example I often think of is when I'm in a supermarket or something like that, and you have the self-checkout lanes, and then you have the normal checkout lanes with the cashier. It depends kind of my mood, but sometimes if I want to go faster, I'll go through the self-checkout lane, which requires a lot more interaction on my part. But when I'm really lazy, even if it takes more time, sometimes I'll just sit and wait and go through the cashier. And that's because my interaction is a lot lower, but I'm willing to give up the time. And so I'm not saying that directly applies to design or anything, but just kind of showing that, the interaction cost can be, it's the sum of two different things. So I want to show a couple different examples of how some apps have anticipated users' next needs. And they've also used past behavior to predict future interactions. And then I'm just going to cover a couple low-hanging fruits here. And Avery, this is kind of the example I think you were referring to, and I'll talk to a little bit my experience with it about using, adopting iOS versus Material and how we, the decisions we made going around that, one of the text or input controls. So the first one I think of is Chess, and you'll start to see this a lot these days. And I know LinkedIn does it as well too, where they just kind of give you some phrases, common phrases that are used, and they just go ahead and make it one click of a button. And they do that to obviously increase engagement and to start a friendly chat. Believe it or not, Chess has a little bit of smack talk, a lot actually, especially when you're behind a screen of a computer and no one knows who you are. Happens a lot more, obviously. But Yeah, they're trying to just promote interaction, and they've just taken things that most chess players say, and they went ahead and give you an option just to click on that to say it. And you can see this is hi, good luck, have fun, and you too. So they've just gone ahead and predicted things that users are most likely to say. So Amazon did this the other day when I was purchasing this book from Amazon. You know, I was actually extremely frustrated because the package I got was just literally the envelope. It was opened, it was never even closed. There was nothing inside of it. So I was quite frustrated that I had to reorder it. It was actually phenomenal. Like, you know, normally if you do that, you'd see it's opened and you would assume someone took it out. Like, it was never even closed. Like, no one even put anything out. And I guess the guy delivering it never thought about it. Maybe he's just going really fast paced. No judgment here, but he didn't notice it. And so I was really frustrated because my previous experience was with Walmart, and they were requiring me to do all this interaction, phone number, etc. And you could use the argument, well, you're already signed in to Amazon, but I was signed into my Amazon or Walmart account as well too. So I'm comparing apples to apples here. But yeah, Amazon just went ahead and they just predicted the reasons that I'd most likely be there to want to talk to a customer service representative. And it was like literally within 4 or 5 clicks, they just had sent me a new book. No contesting it. They just gotten it sent to me. And I went from actually being pretty frustrated because I was really busy at the time to just being, oh, all right, well, that's all right then. But you can see here that Amazon's really taken the initiative, and they've probably done their research, and they probably saved time on their end as well too. Less manpower to, you know, talk to customer service representatives, and made the user happy as well too. So I think that's a great example. Next one is Google Maps, and they've really innovated over the years, and you know, they obviously have the power of some of the best engineers and algorithms all over the world. But I pay attention to this all the time on, you know, how this changes and certain things I have saved, and they'll use the time of day, and they'll also pick up on patterns, you know, pending that you allow certain locations enabled and certain permissions and whatnot. They'll sort of predict what buttons, you know, they want you, or you might be most likely to utilize. So here it's like, you know, I just left work, and I don't really need to know how to get home from work, but the fact is it's there and I constantly see it, and I do utilize it sometimes when I'm out in somewhere where I'm not familiar with. Another example of kind of anticipating users' next needs is Netflix. And this wasn't always a feature, and it's something that I think is obviously they're trying to engage you onto the next episode. I think someone pointed that out earlier, that they're trying to get their users to be engaged, but it's also a courteous thing to do. I mean, if someone, you know, most people typically don't like to watch the credits. So as soon as the credits start up, they just go ahead and start, you know, getting that next episode ready for you. And they assume that you're probably not going to want to watch the recap. Most people don't, so they already have that selected for you. They're just reducing that interaction, both physically and mentally. They're just kind of anticipating your needs. So the point with all these examples is really to just be cognizant and be aware of constantly thinking, how can I potentially reduce the interaction physically and both mentally? And having that sort of mentality leads to a lot of innovations, because these things all seem obvious now, and a lot of these are conventional, but at some point they weren't, right? And it took testing and good observation to figure these things out. And last, one of the last things I want to get to is just the $300 million button. This is obviously a very old case study. I think it comes from 11 or 12 years ago. And I just simply redesigned this screen really quick, so it's not an exact replica, but it was from an e-commerce website. And basically, when they did usability testing, they got to this screen after they had already put everything into their basket and they were ready to check out. And so they'd given users enough money during the usability testing to purchase some things to create it, make it as real as possible. And during the checkout, one of the users said on this left screen, when they were requiring them to sign up, one of the users said, "I'm not here to enter a relationship. I just want to buy something." And so obviously this research, and you see this with most e-commerce apps now, that they'll offer a way just to kind of shoot through and to continue as a guest checkout. But this wasn't such a common feature back then. And when they changed it and they gave the option for users to just continue as a guest, and this was the literal text that they used, they just changed register to continue, and they just explained to them that, you know, they're wanting them to create an account because it'll help them go faster. Ironically, during the usability testing, they also found out that the people they had made that feature for, anticipating that it would make the checkout faster, it was actually slower for them too, because they were re-guessing their password, or they were getting it wrong and having to reset it. So this solved problems not only for frequent users, but it also solved problems for newer users. And that increased into a $15 million increase in sales in the first month and 300 million over the course of a year. So just that little change of the button, one text and a little bit of help text here resulted in $300 million. But again, it takes testing, good observation, and that healthy design thinking. And then selection controls, these are pretty basic. I was actually going to do a lot of these, but and kind of show best practices. But when I started doing them, I realized, people have written whole books on this, and it could go on really for a long time. But just a couple low-hanging fruits that I constantly see. If you have names or cities or something like that, just go ahead and try to capitalize the first letter for each user. You think that's just one click, right? But when you have a field of a lot of things you have to fill out, those clicks and that little bit of extra effort really adds up. And text and selection controls are also really important because most apps, they really have, over 50% of the engagement is typically through input controls or selection controls. If you're any sort of app that rakes in money that way or has some sort of process to purchase something, you're going to have controls. So it is important to get those right. That's one low-hanging fruit that I think that can be easily fixed. Another one is using numeric keypads for credit cards, phones, and expiration dates. And also, I think another great innovation over time was the innovation of putting the camera within the credit card number. And I think Uber started using that really early on and found that it was really a pain for users trying to enter in their credit card numbers, and boom, you can just take a picture and it has your expiration date, the CVV number or whatever it's called, and all that, and it gets it right away instead of you having to click in 16 numbers or how many ever your credit card has, plus the other 2 input fields. But yeah, things like zip codes, phone numbers, like that, make sure you have a keypad for those if you're on mobile, of course. The next thing is on these text selection controls, and Avery, this is kind of what I was wanting to talk about a little bit. So you have high variable dates, and then you have what was taught to me is a poisson. I believe that's a French word, but basically it just means upcoming dates. And so you'll see on a lot of apps like, for example, Airbnb, Google Flights, anything where the dates are coming up pretty shortly and you're likely to use a date that's coming up in the next month or two, they use this sort of calendar view. And that's for upcoming poisson dates. But when you have a high variable date, then I think it's better, and I've been taught and I've seen it, that it's better to use text in or keypad controls and just kind of mask it however you want them to enter up the field. And so to get to what I was talking about, iOS has, I don't know if they still do this, but or if it was Ionic or iOS, but some of their date selection controls, and if you think about a date of birth, for example, that's something that is highly variable, right? I mean, it can go back to the 70s, 60s, 50s, all the way up to the 2000 teens. And so you're flipping through 12 different months, potentially 31 days, and also, how many extra years. So we overrode, in RFs, we overrode the iOS to use an input control for date of birth when we had to ask it. So, and the last one is I always try to avoid dropdowns whenever I have the chance. And that's just because, well, dropdowns, in my opinion, have a lot of faults to them. They obviously have their utility, and sometimes you do have to use them, but I always ask myself if there is a way to avoid it before I use one. And it's typically hiding information. But you can use things like radio buttons, segmented buttons. When I absolutely have to use one for, let's say, like a state selection, I'll use an autocomplete dropdown, which just requires you to tap in. And let's say I want to select Ohio, I just click an H and boom, it's visible. Versus the Rolodex on, I don't know if that's the correct term, that's how I call it, but that's what was utilized inherently on one of our apps. And we decided to override it because, we just think that this is a better form control. Quite frankly, it's a lot quicker and a lot clearer on how to get to your the option that you want to select. So trying to avoid dropdowns when available. You also have switches. You can use checkboxes too. I mean, that depends if you're selecting one thing or multiple things, obviously, but cards are another great way to show information. So a lot of different options there. But anyway, I don't know, what have been some of y'all's favorite innovations over, let's say even like the last 10 to 15, 20 years of, really reducing the interaction? I think one of mine has been the Google sign up button. Instead of having to create a login and a password for everything and keeping track of it. Just clicking that, use Gmail instead button's been one of my favorites. But what about y'all? Have you utilized this at all or thought about this when you're designing or appreciate anything out there?
Yeah, definitely for me is the one you mentioned about the keypad. It's a code thing. It's the input type, right? And that's something that when I'm talking to engineers, it's something I drive home, because even though I put it on my mocks, the engineers sometimes they'll make everything type text a lot of times. So it's driving that home, and for the most part, letting the device handle it. Just put the right type in there, and the keyboard will come up, and the text will come up, and it will work well. And because especially when you're booking reservations, there's so much data when you're selecting. It's an issue for us, believe me. So I have to drive that home. So it's something that we can put it in our mocks, but you have to drive it to developers, because sometimes they won't do it. And you see a lot of apps that don't do that. You select it an actual number area, and the keyword will come up with text. It's the worst. Anyways.
Yeah, no, I 100% the same. In our organization, that's something we've really had to work on, is our design communication on the handoffs, really emphasizing and putting that home, because yeah, exact same problem. So
I have a couple I guess I could share. Two things come to mind for me, and one of them is you kind of got me started thinking about it with authentication, single sign-on. But there's I feel like we're in the golden age right now with authentication, because we've got face scan and fingerprint readers and all this other great stuff. And every time I'm able to use an application that natively integrates with this fingerprint scanner on the back of my phone, it just brings me joy that I don't have to type in a password or remember a password. And I mean, there's even entire products like LastPass or Bitwarden or Dashlane and all these things that have come up to solve this problem. So there's obviously need for it. And it really delights me when the app just kind of figures it out for me, and I don't have to sacrifice my security by having the same generic password or rack my brain trying to remember what my password is. And another one that comes to mind is, I don't know if anybody else uses Alexa for their home automation. I have a ton of Alexa stuff. It does this really cool thing called Hunches, where I don't know if anyone's familiar with it. It kind of just learns your habits. And if you typically have certain lights off at a certain time and they're on, for example, it turned off the light in my shed last night for me, because it just assumed it's hey, we figured at 2 o'clock in the morning, you probably don't need your shed light on. You probably just forgot and left it on, and it just turned it off for me. So things like that, they're really nice. Yeah,
they really add up to be a lot, right? I mean, even with the text input controls and all things like that, you think, oh, it's just one click to capitalize this. I mean, when you have a bunch of those, I mean, it really can, one healthy way I like to think about it, Nick, and you think about that, if in the way I was kind of taught to think about it was, if you just had a magic wand and you could just do things, how would you do it? And then just try to get as close as that, as possible. And that helps it's a really healthy design thinking tool on how to innovate, how to make things better. And when people are angry, a few extra interactions can mean the world,
So I just thought of an example. This is finance app, or you call M1 Finance. And one of the things it does really well, it just lets me in. Just let me in. And it only triggers MFA when I'm going to make an action. So that reduces the interaction. You know what I mean? I can just get in, look around, because I just want to, I'm obsessed, right? And then if I'm going to make a trade, it's oh, what you doing? MFA. What do I need then?
So I'm almost afraid to bring it back to interactions and driving. But for the longest time, I was almost exclusively using Google Maps to navigate. And just out of the blue, I decided, I haven't used Apple Maps in a really long time. I kind of just want to check it out to see what's been going on with all the updates. And I was actually very surprised at how much they were able to incorporate that I didn't even know I was missing. I find myself with Google always having to look down at the screen at a certain point just to make sure that, the turn is actually coming up. I didn't 100% trust what Google was saying out loud to me verbally. But I noticed with Apple Maps, before your like initial action, it'll tell you, hey, you're about to come up to something. Be aware of this because the next light is going to be your turn. And with that, if you're wearing your watch too, it actually signals you when something is like coming up too. So that was a really unexpected experience that I'm like Apple Maps now all the time.
Yeah, it's just little things, right? Interesting. All right, cool. Well, yeah, just key takeaways as we wrap up here, and just to kind of go over those 4 heuristics. And again, some of them are a little bit more theoretical, some a little bit more practical, but just good things to kind of keep in the back of your head as you're going through and iterating and making changes and finding ways to improve things. But use conventions in your industry. You know, sometimes just, you know, people shoot themselves in the foot, and obviously there are a lot of constraints, as I mentioned earlier, but just doing the little things and making things standardized can really make your the design floor kind of go up of your product. And then secondly, place controls close to where they affect change. The farther away they are, the more they should pop to grab attention. Third, don't hide critical information that users need to interact with. Label icons and make sure your designs are accessible. And obviously, I would do want to clarify with that too. Obviously, accessibility is pretty deep. Those were just the 3 most common examples that I see in easy fixes. And then last one is the best interaction is no interaction. So constantly think of ways to reduce interaction costs for users, and that goes both physically and mentally together. So a couple resources that I mentioned that I use throughout here. I use the Nielsen and Norman group and a lot of their data. Yeah, Luke, Jason, I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher it again, but Robluski, hopefully I didn't do that, but he's a product designer at Google, and he's got a blog where he's really put out a lot of his studies and the things that he's done over the course of the years, and they have some really great, insightful information, written a few books as well too. And then Eric Kennedy, one of the founder of Learn UI and Learn UX Design, he's got a way to make things really practical and digestible. So I think he does a fantastic job with that. So you can obviously come back to this. I think it'll be on YouTube and you can check those out. You probably already check out a few of those, but yeah, just thanks for coming. And again, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, feel free to. That's my LinkedIn. And we'll do the UX giveaway now. Wes, I'm going to use that the spinner that you sent me. So maybe while you're closing up, I'll go ahead and try to start copying names from the chat. I did know that I saw that we have one person.
I've already done it for you.
You are awesome. Good, sir.
Yeah, so first, before we do that though, everybody, let's thank Christian. I'll start sharing my screen real quick here. I cannot share. Maybe if you stop sharing, Christian, I'll.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's okay.
There you go.
All right. So share here.
Yeah, and if you took something from it today, I'd really like to know, or it just reminded you of something and you're going to implement it in the future, or made you think about things a little bit differently. I would really like to know. You know, if you have any criticisms, I'm a sensitive guy, so please don't tell me.
Awesome. First of all, like I said, let's thank Christian. That was amazing. There was a lot of content there in a very short amount of time. Thank you for all of the work that you put in here. And I know we've met a couple of times and you really have focused and narrowed this down to a great topic. So appreciate it. Again, connect with Christian if you like, and he can also share a lot about his journey. So thanks again, Christian. And we will jump over to the giveaway. And don't forget, I've got some more slides that I'm going to share here too. Those are my pups, by the way. Got more slides, but we'll first do the giveaway. I've got everybody's name in here that was in the chat, except for co-organizers. Sorry, everybody, I pulled your names out of there. So we'll see who wins. Valerie, all right. So maybe direct message Christian here in the chat and he can send something your way. Congratulations. All right, yeah. And I think this is the first time one of our presenters is giving something away. Maybe not, but thank you for doing that, Christian. That's obviously not expected. But
Hey, trying to improve the user experience of the people viewing it. So.
all right. So hopefully you all can connect, and again, thank you, Christian, for doing that. Anyone have any community announcements before we move on to the next thing? Anyone hiring? What's happening this week? Anything coming up that you want to share?
Ooh, actually, yeah, we're hiring a lot for a lot of positions. We're hiring for a UX designer. We're also hiring engineers and probably some other things too. I'll post a link to our I think it's called it's like Workable or something that we use to do all the hiring. But I'll post a link to the job descriptions. But yeah, I work at Stacks. Stacks is awesome. We're based out of Orlando. We do financial technology, and if anyone's even remotely interested, I can show you some cool stuff after this if you'd like.
And Nick, you use the word remote. Is it a on-site and remote or hybrid position? Or?
Yeah, so like if you're local to Orlando, what we like to do is do like a hybrid, because we do have a really cool office in Orlando, and it's a lot of fun. It's a great culture. So I do like a 2 days in, 3 days out hybrid. And if you're out of state, then we're cool with a remote position as well.
All right, cool, awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Anyone else have anything they want to add? I don't have the slides here, but I do recommend that you go out and look in the jobs channel. I do have them at the end of these slides for the Design Orlando Slack, and there is a jobs channel out there, and obviously there's a Do UX one. There's a lot of other things around events that are going on, so I recommend that you jump out there too. But also now it's picture time. So we're gonna stop sharing real quick. I'm gonna try to get everybody's, if you don't mind turning your camera on, that would be awesome. And we'll just take a quick snap, and then we'll finish up and we'll do a little bit of social UX here. 1 second. All right, we'll give a countdown of 3. We'll on 1. I'm going to take this. So 3, 2, 1. Up. All right, awesome. Thanks, Denise. All right, let me see how that went. That looks great. Thank you all. And now I'll share the screen one last time, just so that we can get you all the link for this. For the Slack. This was Brew UX. It was a lot of fun. Hopefully you all can make it out to the next one that we do. And we do have social UX after this. So if anyone wants to hang around for 15, 20 minutes, we usually will, gab a little bit about either the topic or anything else that's interesting to folks. If we were in person, we would be wandering down to a local pub nearby and trying to catch up that way too. And also, you can take a screenshot of this. You can connect with us on Meetup. Of course, it's how you all met us. But also, we do post the recordings like this. This one will definitely be out on our YouTube channel. And if you go out to orlandodesigners.info for our Slack, you can sign up for that there. And there's a lot of great content out there, so I recommend it. Thank you all for coming. This wouldn't be an event without everybody that attends. And if you find one of these topics interesting, or you want to present something next year, that would be awesome. I know it sounds weird saying next year, but it really is upon us. And starting at the beginning of the year is probably a great time for people that want to try to do something like this. We can start planning and start moving into maybe March or April for you to have an opportunity to contribute.